The October morning at JFK International Airport pulsed with its usual frenetic energy. Maxwell Rochester, 42, strode through Terminal 4 with the precision of a Swiss watch, his $3,000 Italian suit and Mont Blanc briefcase marking him as Manhattan royalty. His phone buzzed incessantly. The Asian merger wouldn't wait, and the board meeting had been moved up. Dad. The words sliced through the airport's chaos like a knife, stopping Max mid-stride. Behind him, someone's suitcase clattered to the ground. For a moment he wondered if exhaustion was playing tricks on his mind. "Why did you abandon us?" Max turned slowly, his perfectly controlled world tilting on its axis. A little girl, no more than 8, stood before him in a navy blue dress with small embroidered flowers. Her light brown hair was tied in a messy braid, but it was her eyes that made his blood run cold. They were his own eyes staring back at him, filled with a decade of questions. "You must be mistaking me for someone else," he managed, his voice betraying the slightest tremor. He tried to step aside, but his feet seemed rooted to the polished floor. "No, I'm not." The girl's chin lifted with determination as she pulled a crumpled photograph from her dress pocket. "Mum keeps this in her special drawer." Max felt the world stop as he recognized the image himself, 10 years younger, embracing Charlotte in Central Park. His mind raced desperately, searching for explanations, for escape routes. "Where's your mother?" he asked, scanning the crowded terminal. At the hospital, the girl's voice wavered slightly. "Aunt Regina says she needs special treatment. She has 3 months left." The words hit Max like physical blows. Hospital. 3 months. The merger documents in his briefcase suddenly felt as weightless as ash. "I have a letter for you." The girl, his daughter, began rummaging through her small purple backpack. Mom said it was important." Max accepted the envelope with trembling fingers. His phone vibrated again, probably his assistant asking about his tardiness, but for the first time in years, the call went unanswered. "Did you find me?" The question escaped before he could stop it. "Aunt Regina works for the travel company. She saw your name on today's passenger list." A pause. "I ran away from home this morning. Nobody knows I'm here." In that moment, as father and daughter stood amid the airport's chaos, Maxwell Rochester realized his carefully constructed empire was about to crumble, and perhaps it needed to. If this emotional beginning touched your heart, join our storytelling journey by subscribing. Every story could change how you see life. The name Rochester had always meant power in Manhattan's corporate world. Born into old money but determined to forge his own path, Maxwell Rochester systematically built his empire from the ground up. At 42, he had transformed his family's modest investment firm into Rochester Enterprises, a global powerhouse with holdings spanning 3 continents. The Wall Street Journal called him the king of clean energy, while Forbes lauded him as the face of modern American entrepreneurship. Yet the penthouse office on the 87th floor of the Rochester Tower told a different story. While Max's rivals decorated their spaces with family photos and children's artwork, his walls displayed only awards, stock certificates, and abstract art pieces chosen by his interior decorator. His life ran with the precision of the Patek Philippe on his wrist. Board meetings at 8, investor calls at 10, merger negotiations through lunch, charity galas in the evening. Every minute was accounted for, every decision calculated. Those who worked closely with Max spoke of his brilliance in hushed tones, but also of his isolation. His assistant Diana had worked for him for 7 years, but knew nothing of his personal life beyond his coffee preference and suit size. The cleaning staff whispered about how he spent holidays alone in his office, poring over financial reports while the city celebrated below. Max had convinced himself that loneliness was the price of success. He built his reputation on being ruthlessly efficient, earning the nickname the algorithm for his emotionless approach to business decisions. When competitors failed, he acquired their assets. When loyal employees became liabilities, he authorized their termination. Everything was numbers, probabilities, and projected returns. But there were moments, usually late at night, when the office emptied and the city lights twinkled below, when something cracked in his perfect facade. He would find himself staring at the empty chair across from his desk, remembering a different Max Rochester one who once dreamed of building something meaningful, not just profitable. One who believed in love before spreadsheets. His parents, Theodore and Margaret Rochester, took pride in what their son had become. They hosted dinner parties where they boasted about his latest acquisitions, his growing influence, his perfect bachelor lifestyle. What they never mentioned was the light that used to shine in his eyes, the warmth in his laugh that had long since frozen over. The irony wasn't lost on Max. He had more wealth than his ancestors could have imagined, yet he ate dinner alone. His signature could move billions across markets, yet he hadn't written a personal letter in years. He owned properties in every major city, yet none of them felt like home. The young executives who aspired to be him never saw the price he paid. They didn't see him walking through his vast, empty penthouse at midnight, or the way his hand sometimes hesitated over old photo albums buried in his private safe. They didn't know about the engagement ring he still kept locked in his desk drawer, or the Central Park bench he deliberately avoided during his morning runs. Maxwell Rochester had built his empire on the belief that emotional detachment was strength. His corporate retreats taught rising executives to think like Rochester: objective, analytical, unopinionated. He had turned his name into a methodology, his loneliness into a leadership style. But success had a hollow echo in empty rooms. The financial press wrote about his bachelor lifestyle as if it were an achievement, not understanding that it was less a choice than a fortress he had built around himself. He filled his calendar with meetings to avoid filling it with memories, scheduled international calls during holidays to escape the silence of celebration-less days. He was, by every measurable metric, at the peak of his success. Rochester Enterprises was about to close its largest merger to date. His net worth had just crossed 11 figures. He had achieved everything he had programmed himself to want. Yet on nights like this, standing in his office overlooking the city he helped shape, Maxwell Rochester sometimes caught his reflection in the window and wondered if the man staring back at him was really living or just calculating his way through existence. The name Rochester had always meant power in Manhattan's corporate world. Born into old money but determined to forge his own path, Maxwell Rochester systematically built his empire from the ground up. At 42, he had transformed his family's modest investment firm into Rochester Enterprises, a global powerhouse with holdings spanning 3 continents. The Wall Street Journal called him the king of clean energy, while Forbes lauded him as the face of modern American entrepreneurship. Yet the penthouse office on the 87th floor of the Rochester Tower told a different story. While Max's rivals decorated their spaces with family photos and children's artwork, his walls displayed only awards, stock certificates, and abstract art pieces chosen by his interior decorator. His life ran with the precision of the Patek Philippe on his wrist. Board meetings at 8, investor calls at 10, merger negotiations through lunch, charity galas in the evening. Every minute was accounted for, every decision calculated. Those who worked closely with Max spoke of his brilliance in hushed tones, but also of his isolation. His assistant Diana had worked for him for 7 years but knew nothing of his personal life beyond his coffee preference and suit size. The cleaning staff whispered about how he spent holidays alone in his office, poring over financial reports while the city celebrated below. Max had convinced himself that loneliness was the price of success. He built his reputation on being ruthlessly efficient, earning the nickname the algorithm for his emotionless approach to business decisions. When competitors failed, he acquired their assets. When loyal employees became liabilities, he authorized their termination. Everything was numbers, probabilities, and projected returns. But there were moments, usually late at night, when the office emptied and the city lights twinkled below, when something cracked in his perfect facade. He would find himself staring at the empty chair across from his desk, remembering a different Max Rochester, one who once dreamed of building something meaningful, not just profitable, one who believed in love before spreadsheets. His parents, Theodore and Margaret Rochester, took pride in what their son had become. They hosted dinner parties where they boasted about his latest acquisitions, his growing influence, his perfect bachelor lifestyle. What they never mentioned was the light that used to shine in his eyes, the warmth in his laugh that had long since frozen over. The irony wasn't lost on Max. He had more wealth than his ancestors could have imagined, yet he ate dinner alone. His signature could move billions across markets, yet he hadn't written a personal letter in years. He owned properties in every major city, yet none of them felt like home. The young executives who aspired to be him never saw the price he paid. They didn't see him walking through his vast, empty penthouse at midnight, or the way his hands sometimes hesitated over old photo albums buried in his private safe. They didn't know about the engagement ring he still kept locked in his desk drawer, or the Central Park bench he deliberately avoided during his morning runs. Maxwell Rochester had built his empire on the belief that emotional detachment was strength. His corporate retreats taught rising executives to think like Rochester: objective, analytical, unopinionated. He had turned his name into a methodology, his loneliness into a leadership style. But success had a hollow echo in empty rooms. The financial press wrote about his bachelor lifestyle as if it were an achievement, not understanding that it was less a choice than a fortress he had built around himself. He filled his calendar with meetings to avoid filling it with memories, scheduled international calls during holidays to escape the silence of celebration-less days. He was, by every measurable metric, at the peak of his success. Rochester Enterprises was about to close its largest merger to date. His net worth had just crossed 11 figures. He had achieved everything he had programmed himself to want. Yet on nights like this, standing in his office overlooking the city he helped shape, Maxwell Rochester sometimes caught his reflection in the window and wondered if the man staring back at him was really living or just calculating his way through existence. In a modest apartment in Queens, Charlotte Bennett lived a life that stood in stark contrast to the gleaming towers of Manhattan. At 39, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that belied of her secrets. Her small classroom at PS 118, where she taught second grade, was filled with more warmth and life than all the corporate boardrooms of Fifth Avenue combined. Few knew that this dedicated teacher, who stayed late to help struggling students and organized food drives for needy families, once walked in different circles. 10 years ago, she had been Charlotte Williams, an art history graduate student at Columbia, whose chance encounter with a young investment banker in Central Park had sparked a romance worthy of a New York fairy tale. The photographs were tucked away in a special drawer. Charlotte and Max at gallery openings, charity events, weekend trips to the Hamptons. She kept them not out of sentimentality, but for Lily, who deserved to know that her father had once been capable of love. The drawer also held rejection letters from Rochester Enterprises' HR department, each attempting to reach Max, each returned unopened. Charlotte's colleagues marveled at her ability to maintain 2 jobs, teaching by day and working as a freelance educational consultant by night, while raising a daughter alone. They didn't know she did it to ensure Lily could attend science camps and robotics workshops, pursuing dreams that reminded Charlotte so much of Max's early ambitions. The small apartment told its own story of sacrifice. While her daughter's room was filled with books, science kits, and a carefully maintained study space, Charlotte's own room remained Spartan. The only luxury she allowed herself was a small balcony garden where she tended to plants that somehow thrived in the city air, much like she had learned to do. Regina, her younger sister and fierce protector, was the only one who knew the full truth. She had watched Charlotte decline the Rochester family's generous offer to disappear, had held her through nights of morning sickness, while Max's engagement announcement ran in the society pages. Regina had been there when Charlotte refused to contest the divorce papers, signing away any claim to the Rochester fortune to protect a secret she wasn't ready to share. Each morning, Charlotte passed newsstands displaying Max's latest triumph. She bought every magazine that featured him, not out of lingering attachment, but to carefully cut out the articles for Lily's collection. Her daughter deserved to know that while her father may have abandoned them, he had achieved the greatness he always dreamed of. The diagnosis came on a rainy Tuesday. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, advanced and aggressive. Charlotte received the news with the same quiet strength that had carried her through the past decade. Her first thought wasn't of herself, but of Lily, who would nurture her brilliant mind, who would protect her tender heart, who would tell her the whole truth about her father. The hospital bills began to mount, but Charlotte refused Regina's suggestion to contact Max for help. He made his choice, she would say, though the words carried no bitterness. She had long since transformed her pain into purpose, channeling it into raising a daughter who combined the best of both her parents, Max's determination and her own compassion. In her classroom, Charlotte created the family atmosphere she wished for Lily, making every student feel valued and capable of greatness. Her colleagues never suspected that the quiet, dedicated teacher grading papers late into the night was fighting a private battle against time and fate. The irony wasn't lost on her. After years of protecting Lily from the pain of rejection, it was her own body that would ultimately separate them. Yet even now, facing her mortality, Charlotte's thoughts were not of the life she could have had in Max's world of wealth and privilege, but of the precious months remaining to prepare Lily for a future without her. Each night, as Charlotte sat on her small balcony watching the Manhattan skyline, she would touch the simple gold chain around her neck, the only piece of jewelry she kept from her time with Max. Not as a reminder of what she lost, but as proof that she had once been brave enough to love completely, without calculation or reserve. In a world where other children drew complete families for their school art projects, Lily Rochester Bennett always drew hers with a deliberate space on the right side of the paper. Not an absence, she would explain to concerned teachers, but a placeholder for someone she knew existed but hadn't met yet. Her father wasn't gone, she reasoned, he was just in a different story for now. At 8 years old, Lily had constructed an entire universe around the father she knew only through magazine clippings and one treasured photograph. Her bedroom walls told the story of this careful curation. Newspaper articles about Rochester Enterprises' renewable energy projects shared space with her own science fair certificates. She had inherited her father's analytical mind and her mother's gentle heart, a combination that made her both brilliant and beautifully empathetic. Every night Charlotte would read to her daughter, and Lily never failed to notice how her mother's voice softened when they reached parts about fathers in stories. She collected these moments like precious data points, building a composite picture of the man who had helped give her life. While other girls her age played with dolls, Lily studied business magazines, teaching herself words like acquisition and merger so she could understand her father's world. At school, Lily excelled in mathematics and science, proudly telling anyone who would listen that she got her analytical skills from her father. She never mentioned that she spent hours practicing these subjects, driven by a deep-seated need to prove herself worthy of the Rochester name she carried but couldn't fully claim. Her science projects weren't just achievements, they were messages sent into the void, hoping to reach the man whose approval she craved without ever having known it. Regina, her fierce aunt, who filled as much of the father-shaped void as she could, often found Lily late at night, practicing her introduction to her father in front of the mirror. "Hello, Mr. Rochester," she would say, then shake her head and try again. "Hello, Dad." Each version was carefully rehearsed, carrying the weight of 8 years of stored-up love and questions. The other children at school sometimes teased her about her absent father, but Lily defended him with the passion of a true believer. "He's changing the world," she would say, clutching whatever latest article she had about Rochester Enterprises' innovations. She had memorized every photograph she could find of him, studying his features to find pieces of herself. His eyes, everyone said. She had his eyes. But on father-daughter dance nights at school, Lily would help decorate but never attend. Instead, she and Charlotte would have their own celebration at home, making chocolate chip pancakes for dinner and watching the stars from their small balcony. Yet even in these precious moments with her mother, Lily's mind would drift to the glittering towers of Manhattan, wondering if her father ever looked down at the same stars and felt that something was missing from his life too. Each birthday, Lily would blow out her candles with the same wish, not for her father to return, but for a chance to show him who she had become. She kept a special notebook filled with things she wanted to tell him about her perfect math scores, about the solar-powered project she built, about how she defended his name in the schoolyard, even when it hurt. In her heart, Lily carried an unshakable faith that one day their paths would cross. She prepared for this moment like she prepared for her science competitions, with meticulous attention to detail and unwavering hope. After all, she reasoned with the logic that made her mother's heart ache. What was family if not the most important project of all? The doctor's office at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center was designed to be comforting, with its soft lighting and muted colors, but on that Tuesday morning, it felt like a tomb. Charlotte sat perfectly straight in the leather chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap, as doctor. Sarah Harrison delivered the news that would shatter her carefully constructed world. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, Dr. Harrison said, her voice gentle but firm. It's advanced and aggressive. The tumors have spread to the liver and lymph nodes. She paused, allowing the words to sink in. I'm so sorry, Charlotte. The room seemed to tilt on its axis, but Charlotte's voice remained steady. How long, she asked, her fingers unconsciously touching the gold chain around her neck, her last connection to a different life. Without treatment, 3 months. With aggressive chemotherapy, we might extend that to 6, possibly a year. But Charlotte, Dr. Harrison leaned forward, her eyes compassionate. You need to understand that this will be difficult. The side effects. I have an 8-year-old daughter, Charlotte interrupted, her composure cracking for the first time. I'm all she has. The unspoken truth hung heavy in the air. Lily had no one else. No father to take her to school, no grandparents to shower her with love, just Regina, who already carried too many burdens. Dr. Harrison pulled up Charlotte's scans on her computer screen. The images told a merciless story, dark spots scattered across her organs like stars in a nightmare sky. The cancer has been growing for some time, she explained. The symptoms you attributed to overwork, the fatigue, the weight loss, the back pain. Charlotte thought of all the nights she'd pushed through the pain to grade papers, all the morning she'd forced herself out of bed to make Lily's breakfast. She'd blamed her exhaustion on working 2 jobs, on being a single mother. How many precious months had she lost to denial? What are my options? Charlotte asked, pulling out a small notebook, the same one she used to track Lily's academic progress and extracurricular activities. Even now, facing her own mortality, her thoughts were organized, methodical. Dr. Harrison outlined the treatment plan: aggressive chemotherapy, targeted radiation, clinical trials if she qualified. Each option came with its own set of complications, its own statistical probabilities. Charlotte took notes with the same careful attention she gave to parent-teacher conferences. There's one more thing, Dr. Harrison added hesitantly. Treatment of this intensity is expensive, even with insurance. Have you considered reaching out to family for support? The question hit Charlotte like a physical blow. There was one person who could easily bear the financial burden of her treatment, whose wealth appeared regularly in Forbes magazine. But reaching out to Max now, after all these years, felt like admitting defeat. More than that, it felt like betraying everything she'd built, a life independent of the Rochester name and fortune. I need some time, Charlotte said finally, closing her notebook, to make arrangements for my daughter. Walking out of the hospital into the bright autumn morning felt surreal. The world continued its normal rhythm, taxi horns honking, students rushing to classes, street vendors selling pretzels. Charlotte stopped at a newsstand, her eye caught by the familiar face on the cover of Business Weekly. Maxwell Rochester stared back at her, distinguished in his bespoke suit, announcing Rochester Enterprises' latest triumph. For the first time in years, Charlotte allowed herself to really look at him. The lines around his eyes had deepened, grey had begun to thread through his temples, but his gaze still held that intensity. She remembered the same look she saw in Lily when she tackled a difficult math problem. On the subway ride home, Charlotte made mental calculations. Her savings, Lily's college fund, the equity in their small apartment, it wouldn't be enough for the treatment, not nearly. She thought of her students, of the field trip to the Science Museum planned for next month, of Lily's upcoming science fair project. How many more moments would she get to witness? The train passed through Manhattan, and Charlotte caught glimpses of the Rochester Tower between buildings, a gleaming monument to the life she might have had. But as the train continued into Queens, she felt a strange peace settle over her. She had made the right choice 10 years ago, protecting Lily from rejection and disappointment. Now she had to make another impossible choice: how to prepare her daughter for a future without her. Stepping off the subway, Charlotte made her decision. She would fight, not for herself, but for Lily. And part of that fight meant finally telling the truth about Max. Her daughter deserved to know her father, even if Charlotte wouldn't be there to see their reunion. Regina Bennett sat at her desk at Metropolitan Travel Agency, staring at the passenger manifest that could change everything. Maxwell Rochester's name stood out from the list like a neon sign: flight BA178 from London, arriving JFK Terminal 4, 8:45 a.m. After 10 years of protecting her sister's secrets, fate had finally handed her a chance to right an old wrong. Her hands trembled as she dialed Charlotte's number. "They've given you 3 months," Regina repeated, her voice breaking. "And you still won't contact him?" The silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. "He made his choice," Regina. Charlotte replied softly. "I won't have Lily used as emotional leverage." Regina's office suddenly felt too small, too confining. On her desk, amid travel brochures and booking confirmations, sat a photo of Lily at her last science fair. The determination in those eyes, Max's eyes, staring back at her. What about Lily's choice? She deserves to know her father. "I've protected her from rejection all these years." "You've protected him," Regina snapped, years of bottled frustration finally spilling over. "You've protected his reputation, his peace of mind, his precious corporate image. While you worked 2 jobs, while you skipped meals to pay for Lily's science camps, he's been living in his ivory tower." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken truths. Regina could picture her sister in her classroom, probably grading papers even now, putting everyone else's needs before her own. "Charlotte, please, let me tell him." "No," Charlotte's voice was firm. "Promise me, Regina. Promise me you won't interfere." After hanging up, Regina sat in her darkened office long after her colleagues had left. The passenger manifest seemed to mock her. It would be so easy to engineer an accidental meeting, to finally make Maxwell Rochester face the consequences of his actions. But her computer screen glowed with an email draft to Max's corporate office. She had written and deleted this message 100 times over the years. "Dear Mr. Rochester, you have a daughter," but she had always honored Charlotte's wishes. Until now. Regina pulled up Lily's school schedule on her phone, a habit born from years of helping Charlotte juggle work and childcare. Tomorrow was a teacher development day. No school. The timing was almost too perfect. She thought about all the nights she had held Charlotte through chemotherapy-induced sickness, about Lily's careful collection of newspaper clippings about her father, about the way her niece practiced introducing herself to him in front of the mirror when she thought no one was listening. The plan formed in her mind with frightening clarity. She wouldn't tell Max directly, that would be breaking her promise to Charlotte. But if Lily happened to learn about her father's travel schedule? If she happened to be at the right terminal at the right time? Regina's fingers flew across her keyboard, accessing Max's full itinerary. Terminal 4, Gate 7. She memorized the details, knowing they would casually slip into tomorrow's conversation with Lily. "God forgive me," she whispered to the empty office. She knew Charlotte would be angry, might never forgive her, but as she thought about her sister's declining health, about the precious little time left, she realized some promises were meant to be broken. She pulled out her phone again, this time opening the folder of evidence she'd collected over the years. Emails from Rochester Enterprises returning Charlotte's attempts to contact Max. Medical bills piling up. Photos of Lily at father-daughter events, standing alone while other girls danced with their dads. Tomorrow, she would casually mention to Lily that she had seen something interesting at work. She would leave her terminal lobbed in during lunch, the passenger manifest clearly visible. She knew her brilliant niece would connect the dots. Regina touched the framed photo on her desk. Charlotte, Lily, and herself at the beach last summer. They looked happy, but she could see the shadows under her sister's eyes, the weight loss that they'd attributed to overwork. How many signs of the cancer had they missed while protecting Max's perfect world? 3 months, she whispered to the empty office. 3 months to heal a decade of absence. 3 months to give Lily the father she deserved. 3 months to make Maxwell Rochester face the life he had walked away from. As she finally gathered her things to leave, Regina felt the weight of her decision. Tomorrow she would set in motion events that could either heal her family or shatter it completely. But looking at her sister's latest medical report, she knew she had no choice. Sometimes love meant making the hardest decisions, even if it meant betraying trust to protect what mattered most. Lily Rochester Bennett stood before her bedroom mirror at 5 a.m., rehearsing a lifetime of unspoken words. Her school uniform had been replaced by her best-dressed navy blue with embroidered flowers that her mother had bought for special occasions. Her hands trembled slightly as she attempted to braid her hair the way her mother did it. "Hello, Dad," she whispered to her reflection, then shook her head. "Too casual, Mr. Rochester, too formal. How does one address a father who exists only in magazine clippings and midnight dreams?" The evidence of her careful planning lay spread across her bed, the crumpled photograph from her mother's special drawer, the letter her mom had written years ago, just in case, a small purple backpack containing her science fair medals. Each item carefully chosen to prove she was worthy of the Rochester name. Yesterday's discovery of her father's travel schedule in Aunt Regina's office couldn't have been coincidence. She had memorized every detail: flight BA178, Terminal 4, 8:45 a.m. The universe was finally answering 8 years of birthday wishes. Lily moved silently through the pre-dawn apartment, her heart pounding with each creak of the floorboards. Her mother's gentle breathing came from the bedroom. The medication made her sleep deeper now, a small mercy on this morning of betrayal. On the kitchen table, Lily left a note: "Gone to show Dad who I've become. Don't worry, love, Lily." The early morning subway was sparsely populated, a few sleepy workers, a handful of students. Lily clutched her backpack tighter, feeling the weight of the photograph and letter inside. An elderly woman smiled at her, probably assuming she was heading to school. If only she knew this was the most important journey of Lily's young life. JFK Terminal 4 buzzed with early morning activity. Lily's hands grew clammy as she navigated the crowds, her eyes darting between faces, searching for the one she knew better than her own. 8 years of studying every photograph, every video clip, had prepared her for this moment. Time seemed to slow as she waited near Gate 7. Her mind raced through scenarios she had rehearsed countless times. Would he recognize something of himself in her? Would he be proud of her perfect math scores, her science fair victories? Or would he see her as an inconvenience, a threat to his perfect world? Then suddenly there he was. Maxwell Rochester in the flesh, striding through the terminal like he owned it, taller than she'd imagined, his presence commanding attention even in the crowded space. Lily's breath caught in her throat as she noticed details no magazine had captured: the way he checked his watch, the slight furrow in his brow, the determined set of his jaw that she saw in her own reflection. The moment stretched like elastic about to snap. All her rehearsed speeches evaporated. In the end, only one word escaped her lips: Dad. The look on his face, confusion, recognition, shock, would be forever etched in her memory. Up close, she could see the same eyes that stared back at her in the mirror every morning. Her mother's voice echoed in her head: "You have his eyes, darling. Windows to a brilliant mind." "Why did you abandon us?" the question burst forth before she could stop it, carrying the weight of 8 years of wondering, of empty chairs at school events, of practicing father-daughter dances alone in her room. His attempted deflection, "You must be mistaking me for someone else," cut deeper than she'd expected. But Lily had inherited more than just his eyes. She had his determination, his refusal to back down. The photograph trembled in her hands as she pulled it out, her evidence, her proof of belonging. She watched his face as recognition dawned, as his perfectly ordered world began to crumble. When she mentioned her mother's illness, she saw something crack in his corporate armor. 3 months. The words hung between them like a ticking clock. Would it be enough time to make up for 10 years of absence? The letter felt heavy in her hands as she passed it to him, her mother's words, preserved for this moment. Lily watched his fingers tremble as he took it, noticed the way his other hand instinctively reached for his phone before stopping. Standing there in the busy terminal, Lily felt both older and younger than her 8 years. She had orchestrated this meeting, crossed the city alone, faced her greatest fear and hope combined. Yet seeing her father in the flesh made her feel achingly small, desperately wanting to be held by the arms that had never cradled her. "Nobody knows I'm here," she admitted, her voice small but steady. "Because that's what Rochesters did. According to all the articles she'd read, they took bold risks for what they believed in." And Lily believed, with all her heart, that even the most carefully constructed walls could crumble in the face of love. The leather seats of Max's Mercedes felt like a confessional booth as he sat paralyzed in the JFK parking lot, Charlotte's letter burning a hole in his Italian suit pocket. His phone had finally stopped vibrating. 47 missed calls from the office, 23 urgent messages about the Asian merger. The board meeting he was missing would likely cost his company billions. But all he could see was Lily's eyes, his eyes staring up at him with 8 years of questions. His daughter. The word felt foreign in his mind, like a complex equation he couldn't quite solve. How had he not known? How had he not suspected? The memories flooded back with crushing force. September 2014. The last time he'd seen Charlotte, she'd been sitting on their beige sofa, calm in the face of his betrayal. "I found the divorce papers in your briefcase," she'd said. He'd been too busy checking his phone for updates from Hong Kong to notice the slight tremor in her voice, the way her hand had rested protectively over her stomach. His father's words echoed from that same week: "You can't build an empire with distractions, son. The Williams girl is lovely, but she's not Rochester material. Sometimes we must sacrifice the personal for the profitable." The irony twisted in his gut like a knife. He'd sacrificed everything for the Rochester name, only to discover he'd abandoned its true heir. His fingers traced the edges of Charlotte's letter, still unopened. Inside lay either absolution or damnation. He wasn't sure which terrified him more. His phone buzzed again. Bernard Phillips, his largest shareholder, Rochester. "The Korean investors are threatening to pull out. Your absence is unacceptable. Either you show up in the next hour, or we vote you out. Everything you've built is at stake." Max closed his eyes, remembering the pride in Lily's voice as she showed him her science project clippings. Just like your solar plant in Arizona, Dad, she'd been following his career, learning his achievements while he'd been completely blind to her existence. The dashboard clock ticked mercilessly. The board meeting would start in 30 minutes. On his wrist, The Patek Philippe gift from his father when he'd signed his first billion-dollar deal seemed to weigh a ton. Time had always been his most carefully managed resource, until this morning when an 8-year-old girl had shattered his perfectly orchestrated schedule. He pulled out Charlotte's letter, his hands uncharacteristically unsteady. The envelope held the same faint lavender scent he remembered from their years together. How had he forgotten that detail? The paper inside was covered in Charlotte's elegant handwriting, each word a potential landmine. "Maxwell, if you're reading this, our daughter has found you." The words blurred as memories assaulted him. Charlotte teaching art history to pay for grad school, her eyes lighting up when she described Renaissance masterpieces. The way she'd roll her eyes at his corporate jargon but still help him practice presentations. The small garden she'd created on their balcony because every home needs something alive and growing. His phone rang again. Diana, his assistant. "Mr. Rochester, the board is assembled. Mr. Phillips is threatening to call an emergency shareholder meeting. Your father is here." The mention of his father made Max's jaw clench. Theodore Rochester, the architect of so many necessary sacrifices for the family legacy. How many lives had been deemed expendable in service of the Rochester Empire? Through the windshield, he could see Lily sitting on a bench near the terminal entrance, her small purple backpack clutched tight, waiting to see if her father would choose her or flee back to his glass tower. She looked so small against the massive airport architecture, yet her posture echoed his own straight-backed, chin lifted, refusing to show vulnerability. His calendar app blinked with reminders: board meeting, merger call, investor lunch. The perfectly ordered life he'd built over the past decade mocked him. But what was it all worth if he'd missed the most important merger of all, that of his DNA, with Charlotte's, creating the brilliant little girl who now waited for his decision? Max's fingers hovered over his phone. One call could save his empire, maintain the Rochester legacy his father had drilled into him since childhood. One call could preserve the walls he'd built around his heart. But another call could begin to repair a different legacy, one written in science fair projects and quiet hopes, in a child's unwavering faith that her father would one day see her worth. The choice loomed before him like a chasm. On one side lay the known quantity of power and wealth, the cold comfort of spreadsheets and stock prices. On the other, the terrifying unknown of fatherhood, of emotions he'd locked away a decade ago. Max took a deep breath and made the call that would change everything. The Rochester Enterprises boardroom on the 87th floor crackled with tension. 12 board members sat around the mahogany table, their faces reflecting various degrees of concern and anger. At the head of the table, Theodore Rochester, Max's father and chairman emeritus, drummed his fingers impatiently against the polished wood. "This is unprecedented," Bernard Phillips declared, his voice echoing off the floor-to-ceiling windows. "The largest merger in company history, and our CEO is nowhere to be found." Diana, Max's assistant, stood nervously by the door, her tablet clutched to her chest. The message from her boss had been brief but shocking: cancel all appointments. Family emergency in 10 years. Max had never missed a board meeting, let alone cited personal reasons. "I've just received word," Theodore Rochester's voice cut through the murmurs. "My son is at JFK Airport, apparently dealing with an unexpected situation." His tone suggested that whatever the situation was, it didn't meet with his approval. Bernard Phillips stood, straightening his Italian tie. "With all due respect, Mr. Rochester, your son's behavior is endangering everything we've built. The Korean investors are watching this meeting via satellite. The merger agreement expires at midnight." The video screen on the wall displayed the faces of the Korean executives, their expressions carefully neutral but their disappointment evident. Billions of dollars hung in the balance. "Get him on the phone," Theodore commanded Diana. "Now." The speakerphone rang once, twice, 3 times before Max's voice filled the room. Rochester speaking. Maxwell, his father's voice, carried decades of authority. Whatever personal matter you're dealing with can wait. The board requires your immediate presence. There was a pause, filled only by the soft hum of the air conditioning. When Max spoke again, his voice carried a tone none of them had heard before. "No, father. For once, business will have to wait." The boardroom erupted. Bernard Phillips slammed his hand on the table. "This is outrageous. Rochester, you have a fiduciary responsibility to this company, to your shareholders." "I have another responsibility," Max replied quietly. "One I've neglected for far too long." Theodore Rochester's face darkened. "Maxwell, if you don't end this nonsense immediately, I'll be forced to call an emergency shareholder meeting. Your position as CEO will be put to a vote." Another pause. The Korean investors leaned forward in their video feed, their interpreters whispering rapidly. "Then call the meeting." Max's voice was steady. "But first, father, why don't you tell the board about your visit to Charlotte Williams 10 years ago? About the threats you made to protect the Rochester name?" The color drained from Theodore's face. Diana, still by the door, watched in fascination as the powerful man seemed to age years in seconds. "I don't know what you're talking about," Theodore attempted, but his voice lacked conviction. "I have a daughter," Max announced to the stunned boardroom. "A brilliant 8-year-old girl who's been following our company's progress while I wasn't even aware she existed. And her mother is dying." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Bernard Phillips sank back into his chair, his expression softening slightly. "The merger," one of the Korean executives began through their interpreter. "Can be renegotiated," Max interrupted. "But I can't renegotiate these months with my daughter. I won't." Theodore Rochester stood, his hands shaking with rage. "You would throw away everything we built? Everything I sacrificed to give you?" Sacrifice? Max's laugh was bitter. "What exactly did you sacrifice, father? Your humanity. Your ability to love anything beyond stock prices." Diana watched as the board members exchanged glances. The dynamic in the room was shifting. Several of them were parents themselves, she realized. "I move for an immediate vote," Bernard Phillips declared, but his voice had lost its edge. "All in favor of removing Maxwell Rochester as CEO." The hands began to rise 3, 4, 5, then stopped. Less than half. The Korean investors on the screen were speaking rapidly among themselves. "Our partners in Seoul find Mr. Rochester's commitment to family admirable," the interpreter announced. "They are willing to extend the merger deadline by 30 days. Theodore Rochester stared at the video screen in disbelief. His carefully constructed plan was unraveling. "The board will recess for 1 hour," Bernard Phillips announced, gathering his papers. "Mr. Rochester, take care of your family matters. We'll restructure the merger around your new priorities." As the board members filed out, many nodding respectfully toward the speakerphone, Theodore remained standing at the head of the table, alone with the ghost of his own choices. "Maxwell," he spoke into the empty room, but the line had already gone dead. In the hallway, Diana allowed herself a small smile. For the first time in 10 years, she felt like she was working for a human being, not an algorithm. The drive from JFK to Memorial Sloan Kettering was filled with an awkward silence that neither father nor daughter knew how to break. Lily sat in the back of Max's Mercedes, her small purple backpack clutched tightly in her lap, stealing glances at her father through the rearview mirror. Max kept adjusting his tie, a nervous habit he thought he'd conquered years ago. "Is this your first time in a Mercedes?" Max finally asked, immediately regretting the question. Of course it was. Charlotte had been taking the subway, working 2 jobs while he'd been collecting luxury cars. "No," Lily replied, surprising him. "There's one in my science textbook." In the chapter about aerodynamics, she paused, then added, "But it's my first time riding in one." Max caught her eyes in the mirror, his own eyes looking back at him, and saw the same analytical mind at work, cataloging details, making connections. "You like science?" he asked, though he already knew the answer from her earlier mention of the science fair. "I love it." Lily's face lit up, her reserve cracking slightly. "Especially renewable energy, like your projects. I read about the solar farm in Arizona. Did you really use AI to calculate the optimal angle for the panels?" The genuine interest in her voice made something tight in Max's chest begin to loosen. "I did. Would you like to hear about how it works?" For the next 20 minutes, father and daughter discussed solar panel efficiency with the kind of enthusiasm Max usually reserved for board meetings. Lily asked questions that showed not only understanding but genuine insight, making connections that impressed even him. "Mum helps me follow all your projects," Lily explained, then fell silent, remembering why they were heading to the hospital. Max gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Your mother, she always was the smartest person in any room. She just never needed everyone to know it." "She still is." Lily's voice was fierce with loyalty. "She teaches me everything." Well, almost everything. The unspoken words hung between them. There were some things only a father could teach. They pulled into the hospital parking lot, and Max noticed how Lily's shoulders tensed. Without thinking, he reached back and touched her hand. "We'll go in together, okay?" Lily nodded, then pulled something from her backpack. "I brought this to show you," she said, holding out a worn notebook. "It's all my science projects. Mom says documentation is important in research." Max took the notebook, opening it carefully. Inside, in meticulous handwriting, were detailed notes and diagrams, solar power experiments, wind energy calculations, even a small hydroelectric generator design. But what caught his eye were the newspaper clippings carefully taped alongside each project, articles about Rochester Enterprises' similar initiatives. "You've been following in my footsteps," he said softly, his vision blurring slightly. "I wanted to make you proud," Lily whispered, "even if you didn't know I was doing it." The simple honesty of her words struck Max like a physical blow. He had spent years measuring pride in profit margins and market shares, while his daughter had been quietly building a bridge to him through science and determination. "I'm already proud," he said, turning to face her fully. "More proud than I have any right to be, given that I had nothing to do with the amazing person you've become." "You did, though," Lily insisted. "Mum always told me I got my analytical mind from you. She never said anything bad about you, even when people thought she should." Max had to turn away, overwhelmed by the generosity of Charlotte's spirit. Even in his absence, she had given their daughter the gift of believing in him. "Dad," Lily's voice was small now, uncertain. Will you help me with my next science project? It's about sustainable energy in urban environments, like what you're doing in Singapore." The word "dad" still felt new, both terrifying and wonderful. Max looked at his watch, not to check the time, but to remind himself of how he had previously measured the value of every moment. The merger, the board meeting, his father's manipulation, none of it seemed to matter now. "I would be honored," he replied, "but I think you might end up teaching me a few things." Lily's smile, Charlotte's smile, lit up the car. For the first time in 10 years, Max felt something real crack through his carefully constructed facade. As they walked toward the hospital entrance, Lily's small hand found its way into his. The gesture was tentative, questioning, but when he squeezed back gently, he felt her grip tighten with the same determination he recognized in himself. They were strangers still, father and daughter, but they had taken the first step on a bridge built of shared DNA and scientific curiosity, of missed opportunities and second chances. The first week of fatherhood hit Maxwell Rochester with the force of a hostile takeover. His perfectly ordered world of mergers and acquisitions gave way to a chaos he couldn't control with spreadsheets or algorithms. It started with breakfast, a seemingly simple task that turned into his first lesson in humility. "You've never made pancakes?" Lily asked incredulously, watching him stare at the box of mix in their new kitchen. The Upper East Side apartment he'd hastily furnished still smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. "I usually have my breakfast at the office," he admitted, remembering years of protein shakes and premium coffee. "But your mother, she used to make amazing pancakes." With chocolate chips, Lily nodded sagely. "And she'd draw smiley faces with whipped cream." She climbed onto a kitchen stool, assuming the role of instructor with natural authority. "First, you need to measure the ingredients properly." Max, who could calculate billion-dollar deals in his head, found himself struggling with simple fractions and egg separation. The first batch turned into a smoky disaster that set off the fire alarm. The second resembled modern art more than breakfast. But Lily's laughter at his attempts, so similar to Charlotte's, made the failures feel like victories. Getting ready for school presented another challenge entirely. Dad, Lily called one morning, her voice carrying a note of emergency. "My hair is all wrong." Max found himself on YouTube at 7 a.m., watching tutorials on how to braid hair. His fingers, accustomed to signing contracts and typing emails, felt clumsy with the delicate strands. The first attempts looked like abstract sculptures, but Lily wore them to school proudly. "It's unique," she declared, "just like us." The nights were the hardest. Used to working until midnight, Max discovered that bedtime stories required a different kind of attention. Lily preferred books about young scientists and inventors, but she insisted he do different voices for each character. "Mum always does the voices," she explained, then fell silent, both of them feeling Charlotte's absence like a physical ache. His corporate life tried to intrude, board members calling, shareholders demanding meetings, his father attempting to manipulate the situation. Max learned to conduct video conferences with Lily doing homework nearby, her presence a constant reminder of what really mattered. One evening, after a particularly challenging day of balancing hospital visits and business calls, Max found Lily in her room, crying quietly over a family tree project for school. The blank space under father on her worksheet felt like an indictment. "I can help with that," he offered softly. "Can you?" Lily asked, her voice carrying a wisdom beyond her years. "I don't even know your favorite color, or if you like dogs, or why you left Mom." The questions hit him like body blows. He sat down on her bed, noticing for the first time the star chart she'd meticulously created on her ceiling. "Blue," he started. "Like the ocean at sunrise. I'm allergic to dogs but always wanted one. And leaving your mother was the biggest mistake of my life." That night they filled out the family tree together, but also started a new document, things to know about Dad. Each fact became a bridge across the decade-long void: his childhood dream of being an astronaut, his secret love of science fiction movies, his inability to whistle. The transformation wasn't smooth. Max still caught himself checking his phone during conversations, still had moments of panic when faced with ordinary parenting challenges, but he was learning that success couldn't be measured in stock prices when your daughter beams at you from the science fair stage, learning that no merger could match the joy of successfully making a heart-shaped pancake on Sunday morning. His assistant Diana noticed the change first. The man who once scheduled his day in 5-minute increments now blocked out hours for father-daughter research. Their code for everything from homework helped to impromptu ice cream experiments. The fearsome CEO, who never showed emotion, now kept a family photo on his desk, slightly crooked braids and all. The most profound lessons came in unexpected moments, like when Lily fell asleep during a late-night hospital visit with Charlotte, and Max found himself carrying her to the car. The weight of her trust, literally and figuratively, nearly brought him to his knees. Or the morning she casually mentioned that her friend's father was attending career day at school. "But you don't have to come," she added quickly. "I know you're busy." The carefully hidden hope in her voice made him immediately clear his schedule. Standing before her class, explaining renewable energy to wide-eyed third graders, Max realized he was finally building something truly sustainable: a relationship with his daughter. When Lily proudly introduced him as "my dad, who's helping save the planet," he felt a kind of success no financial report had ever given him. Each day brought new challenges, and revelations. He learned that compound interest was easier to explain than why people fall out of love, that building a solar-powered model house together could heal wounds no amount of money could touch. That sometimes being a father meant simply sitting in silence while your daughter processed her mother's illness. 1 month into his crash course in fatherhood, Max sat in his home office late at night, reviewing a contract. A small noise made him look up to find Lily in the doorway, clutching her favorite science book. "Dad? Can you help me understand something?" 5 words that would have once been an interruption now felt like a gift. Max pushed aside the contract worth millions and made space on his desk for something far more valuable: a second chance at being a father. The boardroom of Rochester Enterprises had never felt more like a battlefield. Max sat at the head of the table, his tie slightly askew from rushing back from Lily's science fair presentation, facing down 12 angry board members and a video screen full of concerned shareholders. "The stock has dropped 15% since your domestic situation became public," Bernard Phillips announced, sliding a graph across the polished mahogany. "Our investors are concerned about your commitment to the company." Max glanced at his phone. A text from Lily lit up the screen. "Got an A on my renewable energy project. Can we celebrate with ice cream?" A smile tugged at his lips, even as the board members continued their assault. "This is precisely what we're talking about." Theodore Rochester's voice cut through the room. "You're smiling at your phone while our Asian partners are threatening to pull out of the merger." Max looked up at his father, seeing him clearly for the first time. The man who had taught him that emotions were weakness, that family was secondary to success, now seemed smaller somehow. "You're right," Max said, standing up. "Let's talk about commitment." He pulled up a PowerPoint presentation that wasn't on the agenda. The first slide showed Lily's science fair project, a sophisticated solar energy system that had won first place. "This is what real innovation looks like," he declared. "While we've been chasing profit margins, my 8-year-old daughter has designed a more efficient solar panel array than our R&D department." The board members shifted uncomfortably as Max flipped through slides showing Lily's designs alongside Rochester Enterprises' current projects. The parallels were undeniable. "Mr. Rochester," Bernard interjected, "while your daughter's accomplishments are charming, we're here to discuss the company's future." "Exactly," Max agreed, his voice firm. "The future isn't just about quarterly reports. It's about legacy. Real legacy, not the kind we've been chasing." Theodore Rochester stood up, his face flushed with anger. "You're letting sentiment cloud your judgment. This company," Max interrupted, "was founded with the mission to create sustainable solutions for future generations. Somewhere along the way, we forgot about the future generations part." His phone buzzed again, a message from the hospital. Charlotte's condition had worsened overnight. Max felt his world tilt, but kept his voice steady. "I'm proposing a restructuring. Not just of our corporate hierarchy, but of our priorities." The presentation shifted to a new business model, one that integrated family-friendly policies, environmental responsibility, and long-term sustainability over short-term profits. "We've been measuring success by the wrong metrics," Max explained. "Our true value isn't in our stock price, but in what we leave behind." Bernard Phillips leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "The Korean investors have children too," Max finished, "and grandchildren. They understand what's at stake better than we do." As if on cue, the video screen lit up with a call from Seoul. The Korean investors had been monitoring the meeting. Their CEO, Mr. Kim, appeared on screen with his teenage daughter beside him. "Mr. Rochester," Mr. Kim spoke through his interpreter, "my daughter has been following your company's environmental initiatives. She showed me your daughter's science fair project online. Very impressive." Max felt a surge of pride, followed by a stab of regret for all the years he'd missed. "Thank you, but I can't take any credit. That's all her mother's influence." "Perhaps," Mr. Kim smiled, "but she has your vision. We would be interested in funding a youth environmental research division led by the next generation. The boardroom erupted in murmurs. Theodore Rochester sank into his chair, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. "One condition," Mr. Kim continued. "Family comes first. We invest in people, not just profits." Max's phone buzzed again. The hospital was insistent. Charlotte's doctors needed to speak with him urgently. He looked at the room full of powerful executives, all waiting for his response to a billion-dollar opportunity. "Gentlemen," he said, gathering his papers, "my daughter's mother is in the hospital. She has stage 4 cancer. Whatever decisions we make about the company's future will have to wait." Max's father's voice held a warning, "Don't throw away everything we've built." Max paused at the door, looking back at the man who had shaped his worldview for so long. "I'm not throwing anything away, Father. I'm building something better. Something that matters." He left the boardroom in stunned silence, already dialing the hospital as he rushed to his car. Bernard Phillips watched him go, then turned to the other board members, all in favor of approving the restructuring and the Korean partnership. Hands raised one by one, even Theodore's, though he shook slightly. On the video screen, Mr. Kim nodded approvingly. "That's what real leadership looks like," he said through his interpreter. "A man who knows what matters." In his car, racing through Manhattan traffic, Max juggled calls from his assistant about the Korean deal and messages from Lily about her project. The hospital loomed ahead, its shadow falling across his windshield like a reminder of time's precious nature. His phone rang again. Bernard Phillips. The board approved everything Bernard announced. "And Max, go be with your family. The company will still be here." Max ended the call, pulling into the hospital parking lot. Through the windows, he could see Lily waiting with Regina in the lobby, still wearing her science fair ribbon. His daughter had just helped save his company. While dealing with her mother's illness, she was stronger than he'd ever been. As he walked toward the hospital entrance, Max realized that true crisis management had nothing to do with stock prices or merger agreements. The real crisis had been his own blindness to what mattered most. His father had taught him to build empires, but his daughter was teaching him to build something far more valuable, a legacy of love and purpose. His phone buzzed one final time, a message from Diana. "Korean contract ready to sign, but it can wait. Family first." Max smiled, switched off his phone, and went to face whatever news the hospital held, knowing that finally, after all these years, his priorities were in the right order. Memorial Sloan Kettering's oncology ward had become a second home over the past weeks. Charlotte's room, 412, was no longer just a number but a battlefield where hope and despair waged daily war. The machines tracking her vital signs provided a constant electronic heartbeat to their vigil. "The cancer is spreading more aggressively than we anticipated," Dr. Harrison explained, her voice gentle but clinical. "The tumors aren't responding to the current treatment protocol as we'd hoped." Max stood by the window, watching Lily in the hospital garden below. She was carefully tending to the small potted plant she'd brought for her mother, a miniature version of the balcony garden Charlotte had once loved. Even from 4 floors up, he could see the determined set of her shoulders, so like her mother's. How long, Max asked, the businessman in him still seeking concrete data points, even as his heart rebelled against the question. "Weeks, maybe days," Dr. Harrison replied. "We can make her comfortable, but—" No, Charlotte's voice, weak but resolute, interrupted from the bed. "No more comfort measures. I need to stay lucid for Lily." Max turned to look at the woman he'd once loved, still loved in ways he was only beginning to understand. The cancer had carved away at her physically, but her eyes remained as clear and determined as ever. The same eyes that had once challenged his corporate worldview now challenged death itself. The treatments had taken her hair, but she wore her boldness with a dignity that made the silk scarves seem like crowns. Her hospital gown couldn't hide how thin she'd become, yet she sat up straighter whenever Lily entered the room, summoning strength from some deep maternal reserve. The new trial treatment Max began, pulling out research he'd had his medical team compile. There's a facility in Switzerland. Charlotte's voice held the same gentle firmness she'd used when teaching. We both know that's not the answer. My time now is better spent preparing Lily. And you. He sank into the chair beside her bed, the weight of missed opportunities pressing down on him. I don't know how to do this without you, he admitted. I'm just learning how to be a father, and now. Charlotte reached out, her hand cool against his. You're doing better than you think. Did you see how proud she was when you came to her science fair? How she lights up when you understand her projects? A nurse entered with another round of medications, the bags of clear liquid holding false promises of healing. Charlotte winced as the IV was adjusted, though she tried to hide it. Max noticed anyway he'd become attuned to her pain, learning to read the subtle signs she tried to conceal from Lily. Yesterday, Charlotte continued once they were alone again. She told me you've been learning to braid her hair from YouTube videos. A small smile played at her lips. The Maxwell Rochester I knew would have hired a professional stylist. The Maxwell Rochester you knew was an idiot, he replied, earning a weak laugh that turned into a coughing fit. As he helped her sip water, Max noticed new details that tore at his heart, the way her wedding ring now hung loose on her finger, how her collarbones cast shadows beneath her skin, the effort each breath required. Lily's voice floated up from the garden, explaining photosynthesis to another patient's child. Charlotte's eyes filled with tears as she listened. Promise me something, she whispered. Anything. Don't let my death become her defining story. Help her keep creating her own. Before Max could respond, Lily burst into the room, her face flushed with excitement. Mom, Dad, look what my plant did. She held up a small stem with a tiny new leaf unfurling. Charlotte's transformation was immediate and remarkable. She sat up straighter, summoned a bright smile, and listened with full attention as Lily explained the miracle of growth. Max watched in awe as mother and daughter discussed science and life, their shared passion bridging the gulf of impending loss. Later that night, after Lily had fallen asleep in the hospital room's recliner, Charlotte's facade cracked slightly. I'm scared, Max, she admitted, her voice barely audible above the machines. Not of dying, but of leaving her, of all the moments I'll miss. Max took her hand, marveling at how natural the gesture felt now when once he would have retreated from such emotional intimacy. Tell me about the moments I missed, he said. Help me know our daughter through your eyes. Through the night, Charlotte shared the stories of Lily's childhood first steps, first words, the time she dismantled her nightlight to understand how it worked. Each memory seemed to strengthen her even as her body weakened. Max recorded everything mentally, knowing these stories would become precious lifelines to their daughter's past. Dawn found them still talking, Charlotte's voice growing fainter but her spirit burning bright. A new nurse arrived, checking vitals with a concerned frown. The numbers on the machines told a story neither of them wanted to read. Get Lily's father, the nurse whispered to her colleague, but Charlotte heard. He's here, she said, squeezing Max's hand. He's finally here. Lily stirred in the recliner, blinking away sleep. The morning sun caught her face at an angle that highlighted how much she looked like Charlotte at that age, the same determined chin, the same grace under pressure. Good morning, my loves, Charlotte called, her voice stronger than it had been all night. For a moment they were simply a family greeting the day together, the machines and illness a distant nightmare. But Max saw the shadow in Charlotte's eyes, the way her hand trembled as she reached for Lily. The cancer was winning its war, cell by cell, moment by moment. Yet here she was, still teaching them both how to face life's hardest truths with courage and love. Dr. Harrison would arrive soon with the morning rounds and more difficult decisions to face. But for now, in the quiet of dawn, three people who had been strangers just weeks ago held onto each other, learning too late but still in time what it meant to be a family. Outside, Lily's plant reached for the rising sun, its new leaf unfurling with the same quiet determination that characterized both mother and daughter. Life, Max realized, would always find a way to grow, even in the shadow of loss. The discovery came like most devastating truths buried in a folder, hidden in plain sight. Max was clearing out his father's office after another heated board meeting when he found it a manila envelope marked Williams Situation, 2014. His hands trembled as he opened it, already knowing but not wanting to believe. Inside were surveillance photos of Charlotte from 10 years ago. Charlotte entering her graduate school. Charlotte at her part-time teaching job. Charlotte at a doctor's appointment dated just weeks after he'd left. The timestamps mocked him, proving his father had known about her pregnancy even before she did. But it was the contract that made his blood run cold. A formal agreement, drawn up by Rochester Enterprises lawyers, offering Charlotte $5 million to disappear and never contact Max again. Her signature was notably absent, but his father's annotations in red ink told the story subject refuses payment, threatens to tell Max about baby. Initiate Plan B. Max sank into his father's leather chair, the weight of a decade's manipulation crushing his chest. The next document was a memo from the HR department, confirming that all of Charlotte's attempts to contact him had been intercepted and destroyed. Dozens of letters, calls, even a visit to his office, all erased, as if they never existed. "I see you found it." Theodore Rochester's voice came from the doorway. His father stood there, immaculate in his bespoke suit, looking more like a stranger than ever before. "How could you?" Max's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the force of 10 years of lost time. "I did what was necessary." Theodore stepped into the office, closing the door. "You were about to throw away everything for a girl who couldn't even afford her own graduate school tuition." The Rochester name. "Her name is Charlotte." Max exploded, papers scattering as he stood. "And my daughter's name is Lily. They're not a situation to be handled. They're my family." "Family?" Theodore scoffed. "Family is legacy, Maxwell. Family is building something that lasts. That girl would have dragged you into her small, ordinary life. Look at what you've achieved without her holding you back." "Achieved?" Max gestured to the cold office, the empty walls. "I achieved exactly what you wanted. I became a machine. Efficient, profitable, dead inside." He picked up a surveillance photo of Charlotte at her teaching job, her hand resting protectively over her stomach. She was pregnant in this picture. You knew I had a child and you kept it from me." "I protected you," Theodore insisted. The company was at a crucial stage, the Asian expansion. "Stop!" Max's voice thundered through the office. "No more about the company. Tell me why. Why did you do this to your own son?" Theodore's facade cracked slightly. "Because I saw myself in you. The same weakness I had at your age." He moved to his desk, pulling out an old photograph Max had never seen before. Her name was Sarah. She was a waitress. My father gave her $50,000 to leave town. The revelation hit Max like a physical blow. "You have another child." Theodore's voice was hollow. "She died in a car accident 20 years ago. I never met her. But I read about her in the papers. She was a teacher, like your Charlotte." The parallel was sickening. "So you did to me what was done to you. That's your excuse." "I made you stronger," Theodore insisted. "Look at what you've built." No. Max picked up Lily's latest science fair photo from his wallet. "Look at what I almost lost. My daughter is worth more than every dollar in this building." He gathered the evidence into the envelope, his movements deliberate. "You know what the difference is between you and me, father? I'm not going to let history repeat itself." "Maxwell," Theodore's voice held a note of desperation. "Think about what you're doing. If this gets out." It will Max cut him off. Every detail. How the great Theodore Rochester manipulated his son, hid his grandchild, tried to buy off an innocent woman. Unless what Theodore's eyes narrowed. Unless you make it right. All of it, starting with a public apology to Charlotte, then a board resignation, and finally a trust fund for Lily that matches every dollar you spent trying to keep her existence a secret. You're blackmailing me. No, Max headed for the door. I'm giving you one chance to be a better man than your father was. One chance to meet your granddaughter before it's too late. Too late? Bam. Charlotte is dying. Max's voice broke slightly. Stage 4 cancer. So whatever decision you make it fast. Lily deserves to know at least one of her grandfathers before she loses her mother. He paused at the door, looking back at the man who had shaped his life through manipulation and control. You know what the irony is, Father? Charlotte refused your money not because it wasn't enough, but because she believed I had the right to know about my child. She had more faith in me than my own father did. Theodore sank into his chair, suddenly looking old and small. I thought I was protecting our legacy. You were protecting your own fears, Max replied. Real legacy isn't in bank accounts or building names. It's in the eyes of an 8-year-old girl who has your grandson's talent for numbers and her mother's capacity for forgiveness. He left his father alone with the evidence of his manipulation, heading for the hospital where his real legacy waited. In his pocket, the envelope felt lighter now, its secrets exposed to the light. But his heart felt heavier, knowing that the truth might have come too late for Charlotte to see justice done. As he drove through the Manhattan evening, Max realized that some fortunes couldn't be measured in dollars or stock prices. The real bankruptcy had been in his father's heart, and by extension in his own, until a little girl with his eyes and her mother's smile showed him what true wealth looked like. Memorial Sloan Kettering's 4th floor witnessed many battles, but none quite like this. Theodore and Margaret Rochester stood in the hallway outside room 412, their designer clothes and perfect postures at odds with the hospital's sterile functionality. Inside, Charlotte slept fitfully while Lily worked on her homework, unaware of the storm gathering outside. You had no right to bring them here. Max's voice was low but intense, positioning himself between his parents and the door like a guardian. Where her grandparents, Margaret protested, clutching her Hermes handbag like a shield. Now that the truth is out. The truth. Regina emerged from the elevator, her hospital ID badge swinging. You want to talk about truth? She carried a thick folder copies of all the evidence Max had discovered. Let's talk about how you stalked my sister. How you tried to buy her silence. Theodore straightened his tie, a nervous gesture Max recognized from his own repertoire. We did what was necessary to protect. To protect what? Regina's voice rose, drawing concerned looks from the nurse's station. Your precious reputation. While my sister worked 2 jobs to give your granddaughter the education you could have easily provided. Margaret stepped forward, her perfectly manicured hand extended placatingly. We're here to make things right. We can pay for the best treatments, fly in specialists. Mum Lily's voice came from the doorway. She stood there in her school uniform, taking in the scene with those analytical eyes that marked her as a Rochester. The silence that followed was deafening. Theodore and Margaret stared at their granddaughter, seeing for the first time how much she resembled young Max. Lily looked back, her chin lifted in a gesture so reminiscent of Charlotte that it made Regina's heart ache. You're my grandparents? Lily asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, the ones who didn't want me. Lily, sweetheart. Margaret moved forward, but Max blocked her path. No, he said firmly. You don't get to sweep in now and play loving grandparents. Not without earning it. From inside the room came the sound of monitors beeping. Charlotte was awake, her voice weak but clear. Let them in, Max. Let Lily decide. The adults exchanged glances, then followed Lily back into the room. Charlotte sat up slightly, Regina adjusting her pillows. Despite her illness, she remained the moral compass of the room. Mr. and Mrs. Rochester. Charlotte acknowledged them with a grace that made their past actions seem even more shameful. You've finally come to meet your granddaughter. Theodore stepped forward, his usual corporate confidence faltering. Charlotte, we, for perhaps the first time in his life, words failed him. Save your apologies, Charlotte said softly. They're not for me. They're for her. She gestured to Lily, who stood watching the scene with an expression too old for her 8 years. Why didn't you want me? Lily asked directly, her question cutting through the adult tension like a knife. Margaret burst into tears, but Theodore faced the question head-on. Perhaps he recognized in his granddaughter the same unflinching approach to truth he'd once valued in business. We were wrong, he said simply. We were so focused on protecting what we thought was important: money, status, the Rochester name, that we forgot what family really means. Lily considered this, then walked to her science project display in the corner. Do you know what this is? She asked her grandfather. Theodore examined the solar panel array she'd created. It's brilliant, he said, genuine admiration in his voice, just like your father's early work. Mum helped me build it, Lily said. She taught me that real success isn't about how much money you make, but about how much good you do. The truth of her words hung in the room like a verdict. Margaret wiped her eyes, smearing expensive mascara. We'd like to help now, she offered. Whatever Charlotte needs. What I need, Charlotte interrupted gently, is to know my daughter will be surrounded by people who love her for who she is, not what name she carries. Theodore turned to his son, seeing him clearly perhaps for the first time. Max stood protective over his newfound family, the corporate warrior transformed into something far more powerful: a father. I failed you, Theodore admitted. And in failing you, I failed her, he gestured to Lily. But if you'll let me, I'd like to try to be the grandfather she deserves. That's not your decision, Max replied. Or mine, he looked at Lily. What do you think, sweetheart? Lily walked to her mother's bedside, taking her hand. Mom always says everyone deserves a second chance if they're truly sorry. Are you? The question, simple but profound, hung in the air. Theodore Rochester, who had spent decades wielding power in corporate boardrooms, found himself being judged by an 8-year-old standard of truth. Yes, he whispered, his voice cracking. More sorry than I've ever been for anything. Charlotte's monitors beeped steadily as she watched her daughter process this. Lily finally nodded, her decision made with the same certainty she applied to her scientific experiments. Okay, she said, but you have to promise 2 things. First, no more hurting people to protect money. And second, she paused, looking at her mother for strength, you have to help Mum get better. Not with money, but by being here. By being family. The simplicity of her conditions brought tears to eyes unused to crying. Margaret nodded frantically, while Theodore simply said, I promise. As if to underscore the moment, Charlotte reached out her free hand to her former father-in-law. Then let's start now, she said. Tell Lily about Max when he was her age, about his first science project. And so, in a hospital room that had seen too much sadness, a fragile bridge began to form across the chasm of past mistakes. Theodore sat carefully in the visitor's chair, beginning a story about a young boy who once built a solar-powered car, while his granddaughter listened with shining eyes. Max watched it all, one arm around Regina's shoulders, remembering that sometimes the strongest foundations are built on the ruins of what we thought we wanted. The news broke on a Friday morning. Rochester Enterprises CEO walks away from billion-dollar merger. The financial world was in upheaval, stock prices plummeting as shareholders panicked. But Maxwell Rochester was nowhere near Wall Street. Instead, he stood in a small hospital garden, helping his daughter replant her mother's favorite flowers. The board wants an emergency meeting. Diana's voice came through his earpiece. The Korean investors are threatening legal action. Your father. Tell them I'll be there in an hour, Max replied, watching Lily carefully pat soil around a young lavender plant. The same plant Charlotte had grown on their balcony a lifetime ago. Up in room 412, Charlotte's condition had deteriorated rapidly overnight. The doctors spoke in hushed tones about hours, not days, while Regina paced the corridors, making calls to family members. The weight of impending loss hung heavy in the air. Max's phone buzzed again, Bernard Phillips this time. Rochester, you're committing corporate suicide. We can still salvage the merger if you come now. Your father has agreed to step in. No, Max's voice was firm. My father's methods are what got us here in the first place. Tell the board I have a different proposal. He ended the call, turning his attention back to Lily, who was explaining photosynthesis to another patient's child. His eyes sparkled with the same passion for knowledge he'd once had before spreadsheets replaced curiosity. Dad, Lily looked up, soil smudged on her cheek. Is your company going to be okay? The question caught him off guard. How many nights had she spent worrying about his empire while he'd been oblivious to her existence? Some things are more important than companies, he replied, pulling her close. Upstairs, monitors beeped with increasing urgency. Dr. Harrison emerged from Charlotte's room, her expression grave. Mr. Rochester, we need to discuss options. The experimental treatment. Cost isn't an issue, Max interrupted. It's not about money, the doctor said gently. It's about time and quality of life. The choice crystallized in that moment. His phone buzzed again, the board, the investors, his father, all demanding his presence. In his pocket, he could feel the weight of the merger documents, billions of dollars hanging in the balance. Lily knelt down to his daughter's level. Mom needs us now, but I have this meeting. Go, she said, trying to be brave. Your company needs you. The word struck him like a physical blow, his 8-year-old daughter, already learning to expect absence from her father, just as he had learned from Theodore. Max stood up, removing his earpiece and powering down his phone. He took off his tie, then his suit jacket. No, he said firmly. They don't need me, you do. He sent a single text to Diana Implement Protocol Phoenix years ago. He'd created this contingency plan for a hostile takeover. Now it would serve a different purpose, protecting his company while he protected what really mattered. Inside room 412, Charlotte stirred as they entered. The merger, she whispered, always thinking of others even now. Is nothing compared to this moment, Max replied, taking her hand. Lily climbed carefully onto the bed's edge, fitting perfectly in the space between them. Over the next few hours, as Charlotte's breathing grew more labored, Max's phone lit up with increasingly desperate messages. The stock was in freefall. The board was in chaos. His father was threatening to sue for control. But in that hospital room, something more important was happening. Charlotte, in moments of lucidity, shared stories of Lily's childhood first steps, first words, the time she dismantled her nightlight to understand how it worked. Max recorded every word, every detail, knowing these memories would become precious gold. Promise me, Charlotte whispered during a quiet moment while Lily slept. Promise me you'll choose her. Always. I promise, Max replied, and for the first time in his corporate career, he made a vow that had nothing to do with profit margins. The sun was setting when Diana appeared at the door, her face worried. Mr. Rochester, I'm sorry, but the situation is critical. The board is voting in 10 minutes. Max looked at his daughter, curled up beside her mother, then at Charlotte, fighting for every breath. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Tell them to vote, he said quietly. Tell them Maxwell Rochester chooses to be a father over being a CEO. Tell them I'm transferring controlling interest of my shares to a trust in my daughter's name, with Regina as trustee until she's of age." Diana's eyes widened. "But sir, your father has controlled enough lives." Max finished. "It's time for a new Rochester legacy, one built on love, not power." The news would hit the financial papers tomorrow how the mighty Maxwell Rochester chose a hospital room over a boardroom, family over fortune. The stock would probably tank. His reputation as a business leader might never recover. But as he sat there, holding Charlotte's hand while their daughter slept between them, Max finally understood what real wealth looked like. It wasn't in the merger documents abandoned in his briefcase or the stock certificates in his office safe. It was in the way Lily's hand curled trustingly in his, in the peaceful smile on Charlotte's face as she watched them together, in the knowledge that he had finally made the right choice. His phone buzzed one last time. Bernard Phillips. "The board voted. You're out as CEO." "Good," Max replied simply, watching his daughter stir in her sleep. "Now I can focus on my most important job." He turned off his phone, tossed it into the visitor's chair, and settled in for the night watch. Outside his hospital window, the lights of Manhattan's financial district twinkled like distant stars, no longer the center of his universe. Maxwell Rochester, former CEO of Rochester Enterprises, now simply Dad, held his family close and knew that no corporate victory could ever match the wealth of this moment. The last week of Charlotte's life unfolded like a bittersweet symphony in room 412. The doctors had stopped their clinical predictions, the machines continued their steady rhythm, but time seemed to move by its own rules in this space between life and death. Charlotte rallied unexpectedly on a Tuesday morning, her eyes clearer than they had been in days. She asked for her lesson planner, insisting on writing final notes for her substitute teacher. "My students need consistency." She explained to Max, who watched in awe as she detailed each child's learning style and special needs. "Mrs. Thompson needs extra time on math problems," Charlotte dictated while Max typed. "And please make sure Billy gets his reading corner time. It helps with his anxiety even now." She thought of others first. The nights were the hardest. Morphine made Charlotte drift between past and present, sometimes calling out to a younger Max, sometimes speaking to a future Lily she wouldn't see grow up. "Promise me," she would say in her lucid moments, "promise me you'll record everything. Her first date, her graduation, her discoveries. I want to know she'll be remembered." Lily spent every moment she could at the hospital, doing her homework by her mother's bedside, reading aloud from their favorite science books. She had inherited Charlotte's gift for finding joy in small moments, celebrating when her mother managed a few spoonfuls of Jell-O, decorating the room with her latest science project drawings. Regina practically lived in the visitor's chair, running interference with well-meaning but intrusive visitors, ensuring Charlotte's dignity remained intact even as her body failed her. She kept a journal of Charlotte's stories, preserving memories like precious artifacts. On Thursday, Charlotte asked to see her students' artwork one last time. Max had his assistant bring the entire classroom display. They transformed the sterile hospital walls into a gallery of children's dreams, wobbly rainbows, stick figure families, and carefully printed "We love you, MS" Bennett signs. This, Charlotte told Lily, gesturing to the artwork, "this is real success. Not money or power, but touching lives, making someone's world a little brighter." Theodore and Margaret Rochester came daily now, their previous arrogance replaced by genuine remorse. They sat quietly, learning about the woman they had once tried to erase, seeing through Lily's eyes the family they had nearly destroyed. Friday brought an unexpected moment of joy when Charlotte's former students organized a small concert in the hospital garden. The sound of children singing "You Are My Sunshine" floated up to room 412, where Charlotte sat propped up in bed, tears streaming down her face as she conducted them from her window. "Remember this," she whispered to Lily. "Remember that love always finds a way to shine." By Saturday, Charlotte could no longer speak, but her eyes communicated volumes. She watched Max braiding Lily's hair, still imperfect, but done with such love, and managed a small smile. When Lily presented her latest science experiment results, Charlotte's hand squeezed her daughter's with precious remaining strength. The end came peacefully on Sunday morning. Dawn was just breaking over Manhattan, painting the sky in the same colors as Charlotte's beloved garden. Lily had fallen asleep reading A Wrinkle in Time aloud, her head resting on the hospital bed. Max sat holding Charlotte's hand, having learned too late but still in time how to simply be present. Charlotte opened her eyes one last time, looking first at Lily, then at Max. No words were needed. Her gaze held everything: forgiveness, love, and a final entrusting of their daughter's future to his care. Her lips moved slightly, and Max leaned closer to hear her whisper, "You found your way back. Keep walking this path." Then, as gently as she had lived, Charlotte slipped away. The monitor's steady beeping transformed into a single tone, but Max didn't need the machines to tell him she was gone. He could feel it in the sudden lightness of her hand, in the profound silence that filled the room. Lily stirred, somehow knowing even in sleep that everything had changed. She opened her eyes, his eyes, and looked at her mother's peaceful face. "Dad?" she asked, her voice small but steady. Max gathered his daughter into his arms, finally understanding what Charlotte had known all along, that love wasn't about grand gestures or perfect moments, but about being there, holding on, showing up even when it hurt. Outside, the morning sun illuminated Charlotte's garden, where the flowers she and Lily had planted continued to grow, reaching for the light just as she had taught them all to do. In room 412, a father and daughter held each other, beginning the long process of learning how to live in a world without Charlotte's light, but surrounded by the love she had cultivated so carefully. The first week after Charlotte's passing moved in slow motion, like watching a film underwater. Lily maintained her composure through the funeral, standing straight-backed in her navy dress as her mother's students released white balloons into the autumn sky. She accepted condolences with a grace that broke the hearts of everyone who witnessed it, thanking each person for coming with the quiet dignity she'd inherited from Charlotte. But it was the small things that finally cracked her carefully constructed walls. One morning, exactly 9 days after losing her mother, Lily stood in the bathroom of their new apartment, staring at her reflection with increasing frustration. Her hair, usually neatly braided by her mother's skilled hands, refused to cooperate with her own attempts. "I can help," Max offered from the doorway, YouTube tutorial already queued up on his phone. "No," Lily's voice cracked. "I want Mom. I want her to do it." The hairbrush clattered into the sink as she finally broke down, months of contained grief exploding like a supernova. "It's not fair," she screamed, tears streaming down her face. "She was supposed to teach me. She was supposed to see my science fair projects. She was supposed to be here." Her small fists pounded against Max's chest as he knelt to hold her. The sobs racked her entire body, each cry carrying the weight of different losses. Who's going to make chocolate chip pancakes on Sundays? Who's going to know that I need the nightlight on but pretend they don't notice? Who's going to understand? Max held her tighter, his own tears falling into her tangled hair. "I'm here," he whispered, though he knew it wasn't enough, could never be enough. "But you weren't." Lily pushed away from him, her face red with anger and grief. "You weren't here when I had chickenpox, or when I won my first science prize, or when Mum cried at night thinking I was asleep." The accusations tumbled out, years of stored hurt finally finding voice. She ran to her room, slamming the door with all the force her 8-year-old arms could muster. Max could hear her throwing things, the muffled thuds punctuated by heart-wrenching sobs. Through the door, he watched helplessly as she tore down the newspaper clippings about Rochester enterprises that had once been her most prized possessions. "I hate the Rochester name," she screamed. "I hate being a Rochester. Rochesters only care about money and companies. Mum cared about people." Regina, who had been staying with them, appeared in the hallway. She moved to intervene, but Max shook his head. Their daughter needed this explosion of grief as much as she needed the oxygen in her lungs. Hours passed. The storms of Lily's grief came in waves. Sometimes she would allow Max to hold her, crying into his shoulder until his shirt was soaked. Other times she pushed him away, retreating into the fort of blankets she'd built in her closet, a hiding place Charlotte had helped her create years ago. Finally exhausted, Lily emerged from her room, clutching her mother's old teaching notebook. "I don't remember what her handwriting looks like," she whispered, panic rising in her voice. "Dad, I'm forgetting already. What if I forget everything?" Max led her to the living room where he'd been preparing for this moment. On the coffee table lay a leather-bound album not filled with corporate achievements or Rochester family history, but with memories of Charlotte. Photos, letters, small mementos he'd gathered from Regina and Charlotte's colleagues. "We won't let you forget," he promised, opening the album. "See? Here's the recipe for her chocolate chip pancakes in her handwriting, and here's the ticket from your first science museum visit together." Lily traced her mother's handwriting with trembling fingers. She drew little stars next to important notes, she said softly. "Just like you do," Max smiled sadly. "There's so much of her in you, Lily, in the way you light up talking about science, in how you care about others, in your strength, especially your strength." They spent the rest of the evening going through the album, Lily's grief gradually softening into bittersweet remembrance. She fell asleep on the couch, clutching her mother's notebook and finally allowing herself to be a child who had lost her mother rather than a Rochester maintaining composure. Max covered her with a blanket, watching her tear-stained face in sleep. He understood now what Charlotte had meant about love being in the small moments. Sometimes those moments meant simply being present while your child's heart broke, knowing you couldn't fix it, but could help carry the pieces until she was ready to rebuild. The first time Max entered Charlotte's apartment after her death, the weight of his past choices nearly brought him to his knees. Every corner held evidence of the life he'd missed: Lily's height marks, penciled on the kitchen doorframe, Charlotte's neat handwriting on refrigerator calendars marking years of parent-teacher conferences he should have attended, science fair ribbons he should have pinned on his daughter's dress. In the master bedroom, a shoebox under Charlotte's bed revealed the true depth of his failure. Inside were hospital bills, marked payment plan rejection letters from insurance companies, and carefully documented overtime hours at her second job. But each piece of paper represented a burden she'd carried alone while he'd been signing million-dollar contracts in his corner office. "She never complained," Regina said from the doorway, watching him sink onto Charlotte's bed. "Even when she was working 18-hour days to afford Lily's science camp. He'll find his way back," she'd say. Max just forgot how to listen to his heart. The guilt was a physical presence now, crushing his chest. In Charlotte's closet, he found a dress he remembered, the blue one she'd worn on their first date. It still smelled faintly of her lavender perfume. A wave of memories hit him: Charlotte laughing in Central Park, teaching him about Renaissance art, believing in him when he was just another ambitious junior executive with dreams bigger than his bank account. "She kept your ring," Regina continued, pulling out a small velvet box. "Said Lily should have it someday, to remember that her parents' story started with love, even if it got lost along the way." Max opened the box with trembling hands. The engagement ring, modest by Rochester standards but chosen with such hope and promise, lay nestled on faded velvet. He remembered Charlotte's joy when he'd proposed, how she'd said the size of the diamond didn't matter, because their love was what made it precious. On Charlotte's desk he found lesson plans extending months into the future. She'd prepared everything: detailed notes for her replacement, personalized learning strategies for each student, even birthday cards pre-written for her class. She'd fought death with the same quiet determination she'd shown in fighting his family's prejudice. "This is the worst part," he confessed to Regina, his voice breaking. "She died thinking of everyone else's needs. planning for her students' futures while I spent 10 years planning corporate takeovers. A familiar small voice came from behind them. Mom said you were lost, not bad. Lily stood in the doorway, clutching her mother's favorite book. The sight of her in this space, so clearly Charlotte's daughter, but with his eyes made the guilt sharper, more acute. I was worse than bad, Max admitted, kneeling to his daughter's level. I was a coward. I let others make my choices because it was easier than fighting for what mattered. But you came back, Lily said simply. Mom always said that's what love does, it finds its way home, even if it takes a long time. The wisdom in her words, Charlotte's wisdom, broke something in Max. 10 years of suppressed emotion flooded out as he held his daughter, both of them crying for different aspects of the same loss. Later, as they packed up Charlotte's belongings, Max found her diary. He knew he shouldn't read it, but one entry caught his eye. Maxwell will find his way back when he remembers who he was before the world told him who to be. Until then, I'll keep his heart safe in our daughter's smile. The guilt twisted anew. Charlotte had never stopped believing in him, even when he'd stopped believing in himself. She'd protected their daughter from bitterness, giving Lily the freedom to love a father she'd never met. That night, after Lily was asleep, Max sat in Charlotte's small garden on the balcony. The plants she'd tended so carefully were beginning to wilt, another responsibility he'd have to learn to shoulder. I'm sorry, he whispered to the night air. I'm sorry I made you carry it all alone. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to fight for us. I'm sorry I wasted so much precious time. The city lights blurred through his tears as he made a silent vow to the woman who'd loved him enough to let him go, who'd believed in him enough to preserve his memory for their daughter. He would spend the rest of his life trying to be the man Charlotte had always seen in him. The father Lily deserved, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to forgive himself. A soft breeze stirred the wilting flowers, carrying the faint scent of lavender, Charlotte's favorite. In that moment, Max understood that guilt could either paralyze or motivate. The choice, as always, was his to make. The revelation came 3 weeks after Charlotte's funeral, hidden in a letter Regina discovered while cleaning out her sister's desk. Addressed to Max but never sent, dated just weeks after he'd left. The pages trembled in his hands as he read. My dearest Max, today I made a choice that will haunt me forever. Your father offered me $5 million to disappear enough to give our unborn child every advantage in life. The trust fund alone would secure our baby's future through college and beyond. All I had to do was promise never to tell you about our child. Max sank into Charlotte's teaching chair, the truth hitting him with devastating force. The letter continued. I refused, not because of pride or anger, but because I believe our child deserves to know they were born of love, not transaction. Your father thinks he's protecting the Rochester legacy. He doesn't understand that true legacy isn't built in boardrooms or bank accounts, but in the choices we make when everything we want is on one side and everything we believe is right is on the other. The next paragraphs detailed the consequences of her refusal. The Rochester family's systematic dismantling of her career opportunities, the blacklisting from private schools where she'd applied to teach, the random health insurance denials that forced her to work multiple jobs. They think they're punishing me, but they don't understand. Every difficulty makes me more certain I made the right choice. Our child will learn that integrity isn't for sale at any price. That love means choosing the harder right over the easier wrong. Lily's birth was described in careful detail, her weight, her first cry, the exact shade of her eyes that marked her as Max's daughter. Charlotte had documented everything, preserving moments she hoped he would someday want to know. The nurses asked about the father. I told them he was lost, not gone. There's a difference, you see. Gone means giving up hope. Lost means believing someone will find their way back when they remember who they really are. The final pages revealed Charlotte's greatest sacrifice. A renowned children's hospital had offered her a prestigious teaching position working with young patients, combining her two passions. But it meant moving to Boston, away from any chance of Max discovering their daughter. I turned it down. Some would call it foolish, clinging to the hope that you'll remember the man who once dreamed of changing the world, not just owning it. But I look at our daughter so brilliant, so full of your determination and curiosity, and I know that someday, something will wake you up. Until then, we'll be here, keeping your heart safe until you're ready to reclaim it. The letter was signed simply, "Still believing in you, Charlotte." Max read it 3 times, each reading revealing new layers of Charlotte's quiet strength. While he'd been chasing corporate victories, she'd been winning daily battles against bitterness and despair, choosing hope over hatred. Regina found him still sitting in Charlotte's chair hours later, the letter worn from repeated handling. "She never stopped loving you," Regina said softly. "Even when I begged her to be angry, to fight back, to demand what she deserved, she just said, 'Anger destroys, love rebuilds. I choose rebuilding.'" Max looked around the classroom, seeing it with new eyes. Every carefully arranged book, every student artwork displayed, every small touch reflected Charlotte's philosophy that love was a choice you made every day, especially on the days when it was hardest. "She won, you know," Regina added, straightening a row of small desks. "Not by fighting the Rochesters, but by raising Lily to combine the best of both worlds, your drive and her compassion. That's a legacy worth more than any inheritance." Max carefully folded the letter, understanding finally the true measure of sacrifice. Charlotte had given up not just money or career opportunities, but the right to be bitter, the luxury of giving up. She'd chosen to believe in him when he'd given her every reason not to. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with another message from the board about the company's future. For the first time, Max understood exactly what Charlotte had meant about choices defining legacy. It was time to make one of his own. The safety deposit box at Manhattan Trust Bank held secrets that could shake the Rochester empire to its foundations. Regina had maintained it for 10 years, methodically collecting evidence of the Rochester family's systematic campaign against her sister. As she led Max through the bank's marble corridors, her hands trembled slightly with the weight of what she was about to reveal. "Charlotte never wanted you to see this," Regina explained as the bank manager opened the box. She said hatred would only poison Lily's future. "But you need to understand what they did, what your family did, to protect their precious reputation." Inside the box lay a decade of carefully documented persecution. Surveillance photos taken by private investigators hired by Theodore Rochester, showing Charlotte at doctor's appointments, at work, shopping for baby clothes. Each image dated and annotated, proving the family had known about Lily from the beginning. There were letters from prestigious schools withdrawing teaching offers after mysterious calls from concerned parties, emails from potential employers suddenly rescinding job offers, medical insurance claims inexplicably denied despite perfect paperwork. A systematic dismantling of opportunities designed to force Charlotte into accepting their money and disappearing. "This is the worst part," Regina said, pulling out a thick folder. Inside were letters from Charlotte to Max, dozens of them, all returned unopened, marked recipient unknown despite being sent to his correct address. Each one contained ultrasound photos, progress reports of Lily's development, hopes for reconciliation. "Your father's assistant intercepted them all," Regina explained, her voice tight with old anger. Charlotte would wait by the mailbox like a schoolgirl, hoping for any response. Eventually, she stopped writing but never stopped hoping. A series of bank statements showed the gradual depletion of Charlotte's savings as she fought to provide for Lily while being blacklisted from better-paying positions. Medical bills piled up, marked with payment plans and desperate negotiations. She worked 3 jobs at one point, Regina continued, showing him pay stubs from various schools and tutoring services, teaching during the day, online tutoring at night, weekend enrichment programs. Also, Lily could have the same opportunities as other children. The final document was a letter from Boston Children's Hospital, offering Charlotte a dream position combining teaching and helping young patients. The salary would have solved their financial struggles. But it required moving away from New York, away from any chance of Max finding them. She turned it down without hesitation, Regina said softly. Said Lily deserved the chance to know her father, even if that chance never came. Max handled each piece of evidence like it might shatter, seeing for the first time the full scope of his family's manipulation and Charlotte's quiet resistance to it. She hadn't fought with lawyers or public accusations. She'd fought by continuing to believe in love's power to overcome greed and fear. "Why show me this now?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Regina closed the safety deposit box with decisive click. "Because Charlotte protected you all these years, keeping this evidence hidden to give you and Lily a chance at an unburdened relationship. But now that she's gone, you need to understand the price of that protection. Not to make you feel guilty, but to ensure you never let anyone, not your father, not the board, not anyone, come between you and Lily again." She handed him the key to the safety deposit box. Charlotte thought love meant protecting people from painful truths. "I think sometimes love means facing those truths head-on so we don't repeat old mistakes." Max pocketed the key, feeling its weight like a responsibility. Each document in that box represented a choice: his family's choice to destroy, Charlotte's choice to preserve, Regina's choice to remember. Now it was his turn to choose how this evidence would shape his and Lily's future. As they left the bank, Regina touched his arm. "Charlotte forgave them all, you know," said bitterness would only steal more precious time. "That was her gift to Lily and to you. The question is, what will you do with that gift?" Max looked at the bank building, knowing its vault held enough evidence to destroy his father's reputation and the Rochester name. But he also knew that's not what Charlotte would have wanted. She'd chosen a different kind of justice, one built on healing rather than revenge. The final piece of the puzzle emerged during an unexpected encounter in Theodore Rochester's study. Max had gone to confront his father with Regina's evidence, but found him already waiting, a different set of documents spread across his mahogany desk. "I suppose it's time you knew everything," Theodore said, looking older than Max had ever seen him. He pushed forward a yellowed newspaper clipping from 25 years ago. The headline read, "Tragic accident claims young teacher's life." Her name was Sarah. Theodore's voice cracked. "Your half-sister, the daughter I abandoned before you were born." The revelation hit Max like a physical blow. In the article's grainy photo, he saw a young woman with their eyes standing in front of a classroom of children. She died in a car accident at 28, the same age Max had been when he left Charlotte. "When I discovered Charlotte was pregnant," Theodore continued, "I saw history repeating itself. A teacher, just like Sarah's mother, the same idealistic smile, the same belief that love could conquer class differences." He pulled out more documents, letters from Sarah he'd never opened, photos of a child he'd never met. "I thought I was protecting you from my mistakes." Theodore's hands trembled as he arranged the papers. "Instead, I forced you to repeat them." The truth unfolded like a dark family tapestry. Theodore had paid Sarah's mother to disappear, just as he'd tried with Charlotte. He'd buried his guilt in building the Rochester empire, teaching his son that emotional attachments were weakness, that love was a liability in the world of high finance. "I followed Sarah's career from afar," Theodore admitted. "She became an extraordinary teacher, changing children's lives. When I read about the accident, he stopped, emotion finally breaking through his carefully maintained facade. I realized I'd sacrificed my daughter's love for nothing." Max picked up Sarah's photo, seeing in her features the same determination he now saw in Lily. "So when Charlotte refused your money?" "I panicked," Theodore finished. "I couldn't bear to watch my son make my mistake, to choose love over legacy. I didn't understand that love could be the greatest legacy of all." The final document was a letter Sarah had written just before her death, never sent. In it, she forgave her father, expressing hope that someday he would learn that true wealth couldn't be measured in dollars. Charlotte knew Max realized suddenly. That's why she never showed Regina's evidence. She understood you were acting from pain, not just pride. Theodore nodded, tears falling freely now. She came to see me, after declining the Boston position. Said she wouldn't let another Rochester child grow up thinking money was more important than love. That's when I knew I'd made the same terrible choice twice. The study fell silent as both men contemplated the cost of their choices, 3 generations of Rochesters damaged by the same fear of choosing love over legacy. I can't change what I did, Theodore finally said, but maybe we can break this cycle. Lily deserves better than our family's pattern of sacrifice and regret. Max gathered the documents, proof of a family legacy far more complex than stock portfolios and corporate mergers. In trying to avoid his father's mistake, Theodore had engineered its perfect recreation. And Charlotte, somehow understanding this deeper wound, had chosen forgiveness over retribution. Sarah would have been an amazing aunt to Lily, Max said softly, watching his father's shoulders shake with suppressed sobs. Yes, Theodore agreed, just as Charlotte would have been an amazing daughter-in-law if I hadn't been too afraid to learn from my past. The Rochester family gathered in Central Park on a crisp autumn morning, exactly 1 month after Charlotte's passing. The location wasn't random, it was the same bench where Max and Charlotte had first met, where a young investment banker had fallen in love with an art history graduate student's perspective on life. Lily stood between her grandparents, Theodore and Margaret Rochester, as they unveiled their gesture of reconciliation, a dedicated learning garden in Charlotte's name, complete with solar-powered educational displays that merged her love of teaching with Lily's passion for science. Your mother believed in second chances, Theodore told his granddaughter, his voice thick with emotion. She taught me that it's never too late to choose love over fear. He knelt down, meeting Lily's eyes, their family's eyes, passing through generations. Can you give us that chance? Lily looked at the garden, where Charlotte's favorite flowers bloomed alongside cutting-edge renewable energy demonstrations. It was a perfect fusion of both sides of her heritage, the Rochester drive for innovation and her mother's nurturing spirit. Mom always said that love grows like flowers, Lily replied, touching a blooming lavender plant. It needs patience, care, and sometimes forgiveness. She turned to her grandparents with Charlotte's grace. I think she'd want me to help your love grow too. Margaret burst into tears, pulling Lily into an embrace that held years of regret and hope. Theodore watched them, remembering another little girl he'd never hugged, Sarah, the daughter he'd lost to pride and fear. Max stood slightly apart, watching his daughter teach his parents about the solar panels she'd helped design. The sight stirred complex emotions: grief for the years lost, gratitude for this second chance, and a profound appreciation for Charlotte's wisdom in keeping the door open for this reconciliation. Regina joined them, carrying Charlotte's old teaching notebook. Though initially resistant to the Rochester family's overtures, she'd seen how much Lily needed this healing. Charlotte would love this, she admitted, watching students from her sister's school explore the educational displays. She always said education should break down walls, not build them. The garden became a symbol of their healing. Theodore and Margaret attended Lily's science presentations, learning to value achievements that couldn't be measured in dollars. They shared stories of Max's childhood, helping Lily understand where her love for innovation came from. Most importantly, they listened to Lily's memories of Charlotte, to Regina's accounts of the struggling years, to Max's expression of both grief and gratitude. Each story helped bridge the chasm their pride had created. One evening, as the family gathered for Lily's birthday, her first without Charlotte, Theodore made an unexpected announcement. He was stepping down as chairman of Rochester Enterprises, but not to retire. Instead, he would establish the Charlotte Bennett Memorial Foundation, dedicated to supporting single parents in education careers. Your mother changed our family by refusing to let bitterness take root, he told Lily. The least we can do is help other families avoid the pain our pride caused. The Foundation's first project was a scholarship program for children of single parents, with preference given to aspiring scientists and teachers. Lily helped design the selection criteria, insisting that character and creativity count as much as academic achievements, just as Charlotte had always taught. Margaret threw herself into organizing educational programs at the Learning Garden, finding purpose in continuing Charlotte's legacy of nurturing young minds. She worked alongside Regina, their shared love for Lily gradually healing old wounds. Max watched it all with quiet amazement, seeing Charlotte's influence rippling outward. She had understood something it had taken the Rochesters' generations to learn: that true family legacy wasn't built on exclusion and pride, but on acceptance and growth. The reconciliation wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, old hurts that surfaced unexpectedly, but they faced them together, guided by the question that had become their family touchstone: what would Charlotte do? As autumn turned to winter, the Learning Garden continued to bloom, defying the seasons just as Charlotte had defied the odds. It stood as a testament to her belief that love, given enough time and nurturing, could transform even the hardest hearts into gardens of possibility. The miracle, when it came, arrived through an unexpected convergence of science and love. 6 months after Charlotte's passing, Lily's science project on cellular regeneration caught the attention of Dr. Sarah Zhang at Memorial Sloan Kettering's Research Division. The young scientist had been studying an experimental treatment that showed promising results in cases similar to Charlotte's. "This is remarkable," Dr. Zhang said, examining Lily's detailed analysis of cancer cell behavior. "Your approach to targeting specific cell mutations, it's similar to what we've been developing." She looked at Max with growing excitement. "And you said Charlotte's tissue samples are still preserved." What followed was a whirlwind of activity. Dr. Zhang's team discovered that Charlotte's cancer had a unique genetic marker that matched their experimental protocol perfectly. More importantly, the latest test results revealed something extraordinary: microscopic signs of cellular regeneration in the preserved samples. "It's unprecedented," Dr. Zhang explained to the stunned Rochester family. The treatment she received, combined with her body's natural response. "There's a possibility that if we had known sooner." The words hung in the air, heavy with might-have-beens. But Lily, with her mother's determination and her father's analytical mind, refused to dwell on regret. Instead, she threw herself into working with Dr. Zhang's team, applying her understanding of renewable energy principles to cellular regeneration. The breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday, exactly 1 year after Charlotte's passing. Dr. Zhang's research, supported by Lily's insights and Max's resources, led to a revolutionary treatment protocol. While it came too late for Charlotte, it showed remarkable success in patients with similar genetic markers. The Charlotte Bennett protocol, as it came to be known, began saving lives. Parents would have more time with their children. Families wouldn't face the same heartbreak that the Rochesters had endured. Charlotte's legacy lived on in each person given a second chance. Theodore Rochester, moved by the impact of his granddaughter's work, established the Charlotte Bennett Center for Innovation in Cancer Research. The center combined cutting-edge medical research with a teaching facility, embodying both Charlotte's passion for education and Lily's dedication to science. "Your mother always said that love finds ways to grow even after loss," Regina told Lily during the center's opening ceremony. "She would be so proud seeing how you've transformed grief into hope for others." The center's main research laboratory featured a wall-length photograph of Charlotte teaching, her smile radiating the same warmth that had melted the Rochester family's rigid facades. Below it, a plaque bore her words, "Every ending holds the seeds of new beginnings." Dr. Zhang worked closely with Lily, mentoring the young girl's growing interest in medical research. "Your mother's cells taught us something remarkable about resilience," she explained. "Even after everything, they never stopped fighting, never stopped fighting, never stopped trying to heal." Max, watching his daughter work alongside world-class researchers, understood that, while they couldn't bring Charlotte back, they could ensure her spirit of healing and hope touched countless lives. The woman who had chosen love over bitterness was now helping save others through the very qualities she had embodied. The Charlotte Bennett Protocol became known not just for its medical success, but for its holistic approach to healing. Following Charlotte's teaching philosophy, the treatment included support for patients' emotional and educational needs, especially for parents of young children. Mom always said that healing happens in many ways. Lily explained to a group of medical students. Sometimes through medicine, sometimes through learning, sometimes through love. The best healing combines all three. Though Charlotte couldn't witness these developments physically, her influence was evident in every aspect of the center's work. From the garden therapy program that echoed her love of growing things, to the educational support services for patients' children, her spirit of nurturing and hope pervaded every corner. In this way, Charlotte achieved a different kind of recovery, not of body, but of legacy. Her commitment to choosing love and growth over bitterness and fear had sparked a chain reaction of healing that would continue long after her passing, touching lives she could never have imagined reaching. The true miracle, Max realized, wasn't just in the medical breakthroughs, but in how Charlotte's love continued to transform and heal, even beyond the boundaries of life itself. 5 years after Charlotte's passing, the Rochester family gathered at Lily's middle school graduation. The 13-year-old valedictorian stood at the podium, her mother's grace and her father's determination evident in every word of her speech. "My mother once told me that success isn't measured by what we gain, but by what we give." Lily began, her voice clear and confident. "She taught me that true legacy isn't built in boardrooms or bank accounts, but in the lives we touch and the love we share." In the audience, Max sat between Regina and his parents, marveling at how much had changed. The Charlotte Bennett Center for Innovation in Cancer Research had saved hundreds of lives. The Learning Garden in Central Park had inspired similar projects across the city. The Rochester name, once synonymous with corporate power, now stood for something greater: the power of love to transform and heal. Theodore and Margaret Rochester, once so focused on protecting their family's monetary legacy, now spent their days working with the foundation, helping other families avoid the mistakes that had cost them so dearly. They had learned, through Charlotte's posthumous example, that true wealth couldn't be measured in dollars. Max had found his own path to redemption. While maintaining his role in Rochester Enterprises, he had shifted the company's focus to sustainable development and educational initiatives. His office, once stark and impersonal, now displayed Lily's Science Awards alongside Charlotte's teaching accolades, a reminder of what really mattered. Regina, who had carried the weight of her sister's secrets for so long, had found peace in helping other families navigate similar challenges. The support program she developed at the Charlotte Bennett Center became a model for hospitals nationwide. As Lily concluded her speech with her mother's favorite quote about love growing like flowers, Max reflected on the lessons Charlotte had taught them all. She had shown them that forgiveness was stronger than pride, that love could bridge any divide, and that true legacy was built in moments of choice between fear and faith. The Rochester family's journey from brokenness to healing had become a testament to Charlotte's wisdom. They had learned that family wasn't about perfect moments or flawless performances, but about showing up, trying again, and choosing love even when it seemed impossible. After the ceremony, as they gathered in the learning garden that had started their healing, Lily placed fresh lavender, Charlotte's favorite, beside her mother's memorial plaque. The garden, like their family, had grown more beautiful through careful tending and patient love. "Mom would love this," Lily said softly, watching butterflies dance among the flowers. "Not just the garden or the center, but how we've all grown together." Max put his arm around his daughter, seeing in her the perfect blend of Charlotte's compassion and the Rochester determination. They had all been transformed by Charlotte's love, not despite her absence, but because of how she had lived and what she had taught them about the power of choosing love over fear. "Your mother," Max replied, always knew that love was the best investment we could make. It just took some of us longer to learn that lesson. As the sun set over Central Park, casting golden light through the garden's solar panels, the Rochester family stood together, different from what they had been, but stronger for having been broken and reformed by love. They had learned that true healing didn't mean forgetting the past, but growing from it, just as Charlotte had always believed they could. In the end, Charlotte's greatest gift hadn't been the medical breakthroughs or the educational programs that bore her name, but the simple truth she had lived by, that love, given time and nurturing, could transform even the hardest hearts into gardens of possibility. If this story touched your heart and made you reflect on family, love, and second chances, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories and perspectives matter to us. Please consider subscribing to support our storytelling journey and share this video with someone who might need a reminder that it's never too late for love to find its way home. Every like helps us continue creating meaningful content that celebrates the power of forgiveness and the strength of family bonds. Together, let's spread stories that remind us what truly matters in life.